That's me. Good morning. I'm Lawrence Bowdish. I'm the Executive Director of Research and Issue Networks for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. The foundation has been working with disaster resiliency and response efforts for over 20 years, and UPS has been with us nearly every step of the way. Until a few years ago, those steps were on a familiar but evolving road. Don't let anyone tell you I can't be on brand. Working on natural and human disasters the entire time. But 2.5 years ago, that road to recovery and resilience widened with a pandemic response that had been unseen for over a century. Like many responders, UPS and its foundation worked on food and PPE delivery that eventually shifted to a concentration on vaccine equity and access, delivering 1.5 billion doses to over 110 countries. To talk more about the pandemic's lessons in a fireside chat, please welcome UPS's Joe Ruiz, who is their VP of Social Impact and also oversees their logistics emergency team, to talk about these important topics and lessons. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's having a great day. I think we're going to have a great conversation here today. It's really my honor and my privilege to introduce Tim Manning, who's going to share some of the lessons learned from his experiences. Now, Tim has been on the front lines of emergency management and crisis management. He's also worked with Homeland Security and resilience over the past 30 years. And Tim is actually a former firefighter and EMT, so he has been in the middle of the fire over the last 2.5 years and helping our country get through one of the most difficult times. We know that everybody in our country has been impacted, but we also know that everybody has not been impacted equally. So Tim, given all that you've been through and all that you've done, I want to ask you, how would you assess our national resilience? Where are we right now?
Well, first, good afternoon. Thanks, Joe. It's great to be here, and it's good to see you all here. Yeah, I think the challenge with resilience is it's one of those things that feels like it's a thing that you can get to. That it's the efforts you're going to take towards the crisis that might happen tomorrow. We've been for decades been trying to build business preparedness, resilience, work within communities and with households. And I feel like we've actually, in the face of crisis over the last couple of years, made more progress really in the last 2 years through the COVID crisis than we have in the past many years. And I'd say we have a long way to go, but we have made, I think, significant progress, both in the private sector through the NGO community, in individual and community households. I mean, everybody living through shortages of toilet paper, food shortages in the grocery stores. I think people learned the hard way the importance of this, and we've made a lot of progress because of that.
Tim, talk a little bit about what do you think are some of the things that maybe could have been done ahead of COVID to improve our supply chain and our readiness for COVID?
Yeah, I think the COVID crisis has really laid bare the vulnerabilities and the brittleness of our supply chains. We've spent a long time building really cost-efficient manufacturing, cost-efficient markets, where we've, saved small single-digit percentages, mils per unit in a lot of cases, but built a lot of brittleness in that system. Geographic concentration of manufacturing with very long lines of communication. And what we saw right from the get-go is that when you have these both kind of geopolitical disruptions, certainly COVID movement controls, the nation states and just kind of the general society's reaction to the pandemic, but also overlain with natural disasters. The biggest disruption through the entire COVID response was a weather event in Texas. And it was one of the biggest disruptions to manufacturing, and it's still continuing a 1.5 years later. Completely unrelated to COVID, just happened to be overlain with the constraints and challenges of COVID. So I think the supply chain kind of system, the lean manufacturing, I think what many folks have recognized, and I think the biggest lesson that we need to take away is that we need to take resilience deeper into our planning and not, in some cases, maybe accept a little higher cost in order to prevent the massive disruptions that we've seen and we will certainly continue to see with shifting weather patterns, changing climate, causing differences in wildfires in different places, flooding in different places. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us, and hopefully we'll recognize the critical role resilience and building less brittle systems play.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of challenges, but we've learned, we've overcome a lot of supply chain challenges. What are some of the lessons learned from the COVID crisis that we can apply as we enter hurricane season and we look for some of the global issues that we're seeing right now, like global food security, that could turn into again another supply chain challenge?
Yeah, I think one of the things that would be important to pull in is risk mitigation in a kind of the sense of stockpiling as a risk mitigation measure, for example. And I don't mean, I mean both kind of stockpiling on the part of government, like the Strategic National Stockpile or big stockpiles of PPE that have been generated. The recognition that all the way from that to inventory in manufacturing space as a risk mitigation measure. Understand, modeling out what would be those disruption times and what do we need to have on hand to buy ourselves that temporal gap, fill that temporal gap while we ramp manufacturing or be able to get additional supplies in. And that works through kind of the entire economy. It's in the food. We're seeing potential food disruptions out of Russia's activities in Ukraine, for example, and how that ripples through. Increased costs through increased fuel prices. It's riven all throughout the economy, and in all cases, if we take a more strategic, holistic, kind of longer view than we may have traditionally taken, we have an opportunity, I think, to forestall the greatest impacts of those spaces. I would extend that all the way through, as we're talking about climate impacts, water availability, for example. Our understanding of, the way I like to think of it is the base rate that we've kind of calibrated our understanding has shifted on us. Our understanding of what kind of rainfall patterns might exist and water availability through reservoirs and even mining of aquifers, in how it overlays with water availability for people and for manufacturing processes are based on a historical record that has shifted dramatically and probably in a way that isn't going to change anytime soon. So we need to be thinking through kind of those long-term impacts across the board and be prepared for all manner of shocks.
One of the things we learned during COVID was that the government can't do it alone. It's a team sport. Public-private partnerships are critical, as we know, in resilient communities. Can you talk to some of the successes that you saw and how, in your last role, managing supply chain for all healthcare products, trying to get test kits and vaccines and, everything that's needed to all the vulnerable communities around the country. Talk a little bit about the role that public-private partnerships play, not only in COVID, but as we move forward.
Well, look, I think none of this is possible without close collaboration across, we used to refer to as the whole of community, and that collaboration between the private sector and the government, and I'd go even further, the nonprofit organ, the NGO community, that close collaboration is the only place you find progress. The government can provide a lot of resources in dollars. It can provide kind of extraordinary authorities to help move issues forward. I think a really good example of that is how FEMA, on behalf of the president and the government, using authorities in Title VII of the Defense Production Act, created these 708 committees. These basically committees, these organizations of competitors within the private market and the government to share information in a way that protects them against antitrust violations, but move the issue forward and actually get coordination where we were seeing these massive shortages in availability of products, everything from tests to PPE to the core materials that go in the manufacturing of vaccine. And that carries across into the NGO community as well. It's like a three-legged stool, and it doesn't work without all the players coming together. There's, of course, the traditional VOADs, the organizations, voluntary organizations active in disasters that work together in preparedness, but there are also absolutely critical organizations, maybe not traditional VOAD members, but when you have novel crises like a global pandemic can come bring their efforts to bear. And I mean, I think of the work that your foundation has been doing as well, moving massive amounts of vaccine and helping with cold chain issues around the world. Those are things that the governments couldn't do on their own. It only works in partnership.
Well, and again, we're very proud of the work we did with the government to help mobilize vaccines around the world. But what were some of the challenges? You were in that role you were talking to CEOs, trying to get these partnerships going. But what are some of the challenges, and how did you overcome those challenges to get more effective and long-lasting public-private partnerships?
There's a sense, I think, that there's this divide between the private sector and the government, and in a lot of cases, it's there because of there's an instinctual kind of protection, a wall on the procurement side of things, right? That the government and private sector try to behave for fear of protest on a bid or any potential illegalities. But when you get into crisis coordination and you need to build those public-private partnerships, you need to kind of move past those concerns. And I think so some of the biggest challenges we faced was overcoming the kind of traditional arm's length at which the two parties would keep each other, and the concerns and fears of private sector entities that proprietary information that they're kind of competitive, their trade secrets would leak and potentially get to their competitors. I mean, after all, publicly traded companies, the leadership have a fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders that kind of is separate from any altruistic nature that they might bring to it personally. So that took, in most cases, a good bit of effort. But I'll say this, at every turn, whenever we asked for the help of companies, everybody stepped up. People, understood the criticality. We were losing, thousands of people a day, and this is an often thing you hear about. We're all community members, right? The people that work in these companies, we're all neighbors, we're friends, we're family, and everybody is willing to step up. We, the government, and I think this is a lesson to be learned and carried forward, need to have the institutions in place to protect that information, to provide the confidence to the C-suites that we can take in very sensitive information, use it to help save lives, and use it in a way that protects it from negatively impacting their efforts. Those kinds of lessons, I think, are the important things to capture, build institutions around, so we don't have to recreate it from scratch on the fly like we have over the last 2 years, and make progress going forward. Because, look, I know there's a large sense that the COVID crisis is over. It is far from it. The COVID being the most extreme example in 100 years, but we have a pandemic that impacts a lot of people about every 3 or 4 years.
Do you have a fear that there is this feeling that the pandemic is for the most part over and we'll go back to what we used to be, and some of these relationships that we've created under crisis conditions will cease to continue to stay engaged?
I think, unfortunately, yes. There is. I mean, I think it's easy to see that societally there is a great desire to say that we've moved out of this. Now we are moving out of it, and we have made great progress with therapeutics, things like Paxlovid and ritonavir and the monoclonals that we still have. And as we continue to see evolutionary pressure on the virus and it continues to evolve into new variants, BA5 being the most recent, we will continue to have to move through that. But we have an ability to kind of move towards our normal life. But we need to do so in a careful way and make sure that we can provide for, protecting the most vulnerable in society, and do so in a way that we don't just kind of, after incredible fatigue, after now into our third year, set it aside and say, okay, we're just back. We need to incorporate the lessons we've learned. We need to build these institutions. We need to cement the ad hoc systems and processes and programs that we've built, so we don't have to do it again, so that we permanently learn those lessons.
Tim, you led FEMA's preparedness efforts for 8 years, and you had a unique perspective on threats, risks, and vulnerabilities. So where should we be focused, given limited resources and actually fatigue that we might see coming out of this stage of the pandemic?
So it's easy for me after the last couple of years to focus in on those kind of public health things, but I think the most important thing in all cases, I mean, everybody here and listening knows, we like to think of it as all hazard emergency management, right? You take those things that have applicability across the entire suite of risks. And we've learned a lot of things in the COVID response that have applicability across all of it. I think going forward, I've mentioned climate impacts a number of times here. We have a responsibility to build institutions that are resilient against all shocks, all of those disruptions, and they can come from anything. As I mentioned, our biggest disruption in the COVID response was a weather event. We have had public health concerns in natural disasters. It's all a web, kind of interconnected. So, I think going forward, the things we need to focus on are the things that, the rising tide lifting all boats. What are the things that can build our capacity, build our resilience against any potential shocks? And then that's work enough. And then identify those kind of specific things that will help us against specific risks. You can get more tactical at that point. But we have really important things that we can do that will protect us, that will mitigate the risk from major shocks, be they climate, the impacts of climate that cause change migratory patterns or increased interaction with animal populations that results in a zoonotic disease outbreak, or just kind of your general disruptions and shifting extreme weather patterns like hurricanes in weird times of year, tornadoes in Europe. These things that we don't have record of are happening pretty regularly now.
So you've got, an audience made up of private sector, nonprofits, and government. From your unique perspective, what should we be doing right now? What should our teams, our companies, organizations, and the government be looking at? Are there any reforms we should be making? What shifts should we be taking a look at?
Well, on reforms on the government side, I would say on the major progress we've made as a nation, in a discipline, in the Homeland Security disaster space, all come from major reforms on the heels of catastrophe. Some of the most recent being, of course, the post-Sandy Act, the post-Katrina Reform Acts, the 9/11 Act, the Homeland Security Act. Go back decades, you'll see the same thing. The CERCLA, RCRA, environmental laws that changed after Love Canal and Times Beach and some of the environmental hazards of the 70s, the Stafford Act, all of these this major progress comes from institutionalizing through legislation reforms to our structures. And I hope that we take the opportunity now to do the same, that there is absolutely a need, I think, to rethink the way the government works with itself through all the different authorities and different agencies, streamline those things, capitalize on the expertise where it lies, and pull, just like we do in emergency management, pull all of the strengths of the government together in a consistent, holistic approach to crisis. So on the government side, I hope we move that way, and I hope we do so quickly. On the larger kind of coordination, private sector, I would urge companies to look at your manufacturing footprint, look at your global supply chain footprint, look many tiers up in your supply chain, and look for those shifting patterns. Look for those things where both the things that you've identified as constraints through this COVID response, but don't just I would urge everybody, this goes for everything, right? Don't allow yourself to be lulled into complacency by thinking we fixed the thing that broke yesterday. Focus on what might break tomorrow, given a changing environment. And the government working together, I think the government is well poised, if it can continue the efforts, the progress it's made, to support the industry's moves towards resilience. I think we have progress there, and I'd love to see it continue.
Well, Tim, I think we have made a lot of progress, and I want to say thank you for your service to help all of us get through and support all of us through the pandemic. The UPS Foundation was very proud to work in collaboration with public-private partnerships to help serve and deliver vaccines around the world. We continue to be committed to making communities more resilient and safe. We are really proud of our 500,000 employees who are essential, who helped deliver everything we needed during that time frame. And I also want to thank the U.S. Chamber Foundation for the work that we have done in collaboration to help strengthen and make resilient businesses, as small businesses, be more effective with business continuity with our Resilience in the Box platform, which you can find on the U.S. Chamber website. And so thank you again, Tim, for all you do, and thank you, everybody, for being here and taking the time to learn about how we can all make our communities more resilient. So with that, I have one announcement that they would like me to make, that we are on break. So thank you very much.